Bitcoin did not become famous because of banks, investors, or governments. It became famous because of a dark corner of the internet. For many people, the first time they ever heard the word Bitcoin was not in a finance article. It was in a crime headline. Those stories all pointed to one name: Silk Road, an online marketplace hidden from the surface web, a place where illegal goods were traded freely, and a platform that unintentionally gave Bitcoin its first global spotlight. This is the story of how Bitcoin's earliest exposure shaped its reputation, how the media framed that exposure, and how Bitcoin eventually outgrew a narrative that nearly defined it forever. What Silk Road really was. Silk Road launched in 2011, created by Ross Ulbricht, operating under the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. It ran on the Tor network, which allowed users to browse anonymously. No names, no locations, no easy tracking. Silk Road was designed as a free market experiment, but it quickly became a marketplace for illegal goods. Drugs were the most common products, but there were also fake IDs, hacking tools, and other prohibited services. What made Silk Road different wasn't what it sold. Illegal markets existed long before. What made it different was how people paid, why Bitcoin was chosen. Traditional payment systems simply could not work on Silk Road. Credit cards required real names and identity checks. Bank transfers could be frozen at any moment. Payment companies watched every transaction and could shut accounts down without warning. For an anonymous online marketplace, these systems were useless. Bitcoin was different. It allowed people to send money directly to each other, without a bank in the middle. There was no central authority to approve or block payments. Transactions couldn't be reversed, and they worked across borders just as easily as they worked locally. Anyone with an internet connection could use it, no permission required. At the time, Bitcoin was still new and experimental. Very few people understood how it worked, and almost no governments had rules for it. That lack of regulation made it practical for Silk Road, but it also showed Bitcoin's real power. Silk Road didn't choose Bitcoin because it was criminal. It chose Bitcoin because it solved a real problem. It worked where everything else failed. In that moment, Bitcoin stopped being just an idea. It became infrastructure. And that single use case pushed Bitcoin into global awareness, changing its future forever. Media framing and the birth of a narrative. In 2013, everything changed. The FBI shut Silk Road down. Ross Ulbricht was arrested, servers were seized, and millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin was taken by authorities. It was a dramatic moment, and the media moved fast. But the story they told wasn't careful. It was simple. Instead of saying an illegal marketplace used Bitcoin, headlines flipped the message. Bitcoin itself was blamed. News reports declared that Bitcoin enabled crime, that it was the currency of drug dealers, and that it fueled the dark web. The difference between a tool and how it was used completely disappeared. Overnight, Bitcoin stopped being part of the story and became the villain of it. Very few articles explained important facts. Almost no one mentioned that Bitcoin transactions were public and traceable. Hardly anyone pointed out that Silk Road used only a tiny fraction of the total Bitcoin supply, and almost no reports compared it to reality, that cash was, and still is, the most widely used tool for criminal activity. But the media didn't need nuance. The narrative was emotional, shocking, and easy to understand. And because of that, it stuck. That single moment shaped how the world viewed Bitcoin for years to come. The long shadow Silk Road cast. For many years, Silk Road controlled how the world saw Bitcoin. Its shadow was long and heavy. Banks refused to work with it, afraid of legal and reputational risk. Governments dismissed it as dangerous, unstable, and something that needed to be controlled or shut down. Most serious investors stayed far away. Bitcoin was labeled as a tool for criminals, a threat to financial systems, and a temporary experiment that would eventually disappear. These labels stuck, even as reality quietly changed in the background. While developers improved the technology and businesses slowly began using Bitcoin for legal purposes, its reputation didn't move at the same speed. Public perception stayed frozen in the Silk Road era. Early Bitcoin users found themselves constantly defending it. not by explaining how the technology worked, but by answering moral accusations. They weren't asked, is it efficient? They were asked, is it dangerous? Silk Road became Bitcoin's original sin, a moment that shaped its image long after the event itself was gone. Why the narrative was wrong. With time, the story around Bitcoin slowly began to fall apart. Law enforcement agencies discovered something unexpected and ironic. Bitcoin was actually bad for criminals. Every transaction left a permanent record. It was public. It was traceable. There was no way to erase it. Many Silk Road users weren't caught because Bitcoin failed. They were caught because Bitcoin worked exactly as designed. Investigators could follow transaction trails, connect wallets, and build cases using data that never disappeared. At the same time, Bitcoin's legitimate use was growing fast. Exchanges made buying and selling easier. Wallets became simpler and safer. Businesses and online merchants started accepting Bitcoin for real goods and services, not just underground markets. Later, independent studies confirmed what the data already showed. Illegal activity made up only a small and shrinking portion of Bitcoin transactions, far less than the amount of crime still done using cash. The gap between the media story and reality became impossible to ignore. The narrative no longer matched the facts. And once the data spoke clearly, the old story began to lose its power. How Bitcoin outgrew its first image. Bitcoin didn't escape the Silk Road label through advertising or public relations. It escaped it by being useful, and by surviving long enough for people to see that usefulness for themselves. Gradually, Bitcoin found new roles. People began using it to send money across borders quickly and cheaply. In countries facing high inflation, it became a way to protect savings. In places with restricted or unstable banking systems, Bitcoin offered financial access to people who had none before. As real-world use grew, institutions started paying attention. Hedge funds began analyzing Bitcoin as a new asset class. Public companies added it to their balance sheets. Regulators, once dismissive, began writing rules instead of calling for bans. Step by step, Bitcoin evolved from a risky experiment to digital infrastructure. The Silk Road story didn't disappear, but it faded into history. It became a footnote, not the headline, and that shift marked the moment Bitcoin truly moved beyond its first image. Silk Road may have been Bitcoin's first exposure, but it was never its final story. Bitcoin survived misunderstanding, fear, and its darkest chapter, and came out stronger on the other side. If this video helped you see Bitcoin's history more clearly, like this video, it really helps the channel. Subscribe for more deep, simple documentaries on money, technology, and the stories that shape the digital world. And comment below, was Silk Road a mistake or an unavoidable chapter in Bitcoin's journey? Thanks for watching.